August 19th, 2016. After 4 years of fans waiting for a new album following the highly acclaimed Channel Orange, Frank Ocean released a throwaway visual album titled Endless, which featured a 40-minute visual edited from a 140-minute stream of Frank building something. It was unclear at first what it was, but it eventually turned out to be a piece of modern art called The Stairway to Heaven. The piece was a large spiral staircase in the middle of a room. After its completion, the stream ended. Fans were confused and disappointed with this release. 1 day later, Frank would shock the music community. As it would turn out, Endless was seemingly a way for Frank to get out of his label and release what he really wanted to create, which many consider to be one of the greatest albums of all time. Blonde was released on August 20th, 2016. Its cover depicted a green-haired Frank Ocean in the shower, crying. Around him was a white frame, and at the top, the word spelt out Blonde, which dropped the E. The album has 17 tracks and a runtime of exactly 1 hour. Everything about this album is crafted to be very organized, which sparked many theories about the album's meaning. To everyone it's different, which adds to the beauty of the album. Many find it personal and are able to relate to it on a different level than another. Blonde is extremely experimental, conceptually beautiful, and phenomenally intentional. My name is Jakob Kuhn, and this is Alluring Albums, Episode 1. Before I begin explaining the album, it's important to understand that Blonde is told primarily in hindsight. In other words, Frank is looking back on past experiences, usually on failed romances. The album discusses at least 4 relationships, but mainly focuses on one relationship with a girl who is unnamed in this album, so for the purposes of this album, I will be calling her Alara. Frank uses these relationships to discuss several themes on the album, which include, but are not limited to, immortality, reaching nirvana, fulfillment, being wanted, identity, growth, grief, trauma, and cycles. And that, once again, is just to name a few. Another important detail to note about Blonde is how Frank's narration of these stories is faulty because of how distant he is from them. We get the sense that Frank is almost trauma blocking some of these stories, or that he's losing his perception of these stories as details seem to be missing. Because of this, there are a lot of inferences that have to be made, which adds a sense of interpretation that lets people think in different ways. The album begins with Nikes, and introduces us to the main relationship that I mentioned earlier between Frank and Alara. Here we see the tone of this relationship being set as they meet at a house party, Frank being a dumb teenager and Alara having been dating Frank's cousin for a little while. Nonetheless, Frank and Alara hit it off and start bonding. They take drugs together, they talk under the stars. It starts off as what seems to be an ideal relationship for Frank. We get introduced to one main theme in the song, Frank's desire to be wanted. He makes a point of explaining to Alara that he is worth a relationship, very clearly desperate to keep her interested. This segues us into song 2 on the album, Ivy. Ivy is a story that takes place before Nikes and is most likely talking about his first girlfriend. What's evident in this song is that we see Frank using hindsight to his advantage by explaining to us that this girl was very clearly faking her love, which is something that Frank would have not known in the moment. However, he is too in love to see these negatives, and remains in love until they inevitably break up. This introduces us to Frank's relationship trauma, another recurring theme of the album. As Ivy concludes with the smashing of instruments, we go to the song that introduces one of my favorite themes of the album. Pink Plus White tells the story of Frank's friend from the University of Orleans who died in Hurricane Katrina, and it's when Frank starts to explore the idea of immortality. He wonders where his friend went after he dies and what the meaning of life is, and whether life is happier after death. This will eventually lead Frank to spiral down towards curiosity about nirvana, more specifically whether it's achievable on Earth. After the interlude Be Yourself, which is a short voicemail urging against drugs and insisting that Frank focuses more on going after who he should be instead of what others want him to be. We see 2 themes battling against each other. Identity and self-appreciation versus a thirst of being wanted. Solo follows Be Yourself and dives back into Frank's relationship with Alara, talking about how he feels unfulfilled in the relationship as it is mainly based around drugs and lust. This makes Frank think about yet another theme of the album, that being fulfillment. Is he happy with Alara? Are the exchanges of brief pleasure worth Frank's time? Is Frank feeling more fulfilled when he's in a relationship, or would he rather live his life alone? During this song, he is also experimenting with the idea of finding heaven on earth by smoking weed and taking drugs, almost forcing this sense of nirvana, which is described as a state of oblivion to care, pain, or external reality. Frank is convinced that if he was to reach nirvana, it would be through this method. Skyline 2 almost serves as a bridge between the 2 sides of Frank's relationship with Alara, as from here on out, it goes downhill. Frank knows this, obviously, As he's noting how, going off of the topics introduced in solo, Allara seems to be hurting him as she grows distant in the daytime and is only using him to get high at night. Frank begins to see this as a cycle and grows upset thinking about it. Self-control is, once again, bouncing to a different story. This one, however, is very different from the others, as it follows Frank pursuing a relationship with a person that he very deeply cares about, and she very deeply cares about him. However, as they got closer, they realized that they just weren't connecting and that the relationship wouldn't work. Through desperation, Frank tries to force it to switch from a platonic to romantic, and, in doing that, loses his self-control and scares her off. This song displayed Frank's desperation to be wanted and his desperation to be with this girl. As he notices that this girl is seeing someone else, Frank displays a theme that he will see prevalent towards the end of the album: growth. He's able to move away from the thoughts of forcing himself between the two and just accepts that, even though she is dating someone, he can keep his love in a non-harmful way, exercising his self-control. Good Guy is the second interlude of the album and shows reasons why Frank would have relationship problems with Allara, as while they are dating, Frank consistently went to meet with other partners and cheat on Allara. In this song, Frank talks about a boyfriend that he met at a gay bar, who he would consistently mess around with. We get the sense that this is something that happens a lot, quick little throwaway relationships. While it's clear that Frank is remorseful, it's also clear that he's doing this for a reason. Clearly something angers Frank about the relationship he has with Allara. Nights is the 9th song on Blonde and marks a stark turning point in the album. The song starts with Frank being open to Allara for the first time. He tells her that the relationship is terrible and unhealthy, that she's constantly hurting him, and how she's using him, and how he feels like the relationship changes constantly. One day she'll completely ignore him, and one day she'll be extremely close with him. Frank also acknowledges that he probably acts in the same way. The feelings completely change routinely, and it's a never-ending cycle. We also see Frank mention the idea of nirvana on Earth again. In the middle of the song, at the exact middle point of the album, Frank switches the beat as the album changes. The first half, which we just got through, was the day half of the album, where the songs were more based around freedom, love, and those fun teenage years. Night Mode is the complete opposite. It's dark, depressing, and dives into the negatives of that time of Frank's life, where everything goes downhill. Part 2 of Nights reflects Frank's reason for being so dependent on Allara, as it's revealed that she was the one that helped him and aided him while he was homeless from Hurricane Katrina, so he feels some emotional dependency. This causes Frank to become more confused about his priorities in the relationship. Solo Reprise is the only song that doesn't have Frank on it, rather it's sung completely by Andre 3000. This part of the album gets complicated as it becomes evident that Allara and Frank broke up because the song is about feeling mentally so low. This is further elaborated on Pretty Sweet, which is a chaotic mix of instruments and intense sound that implies how Frank is losing his mind after the breakup. We can imply that they broke up because of what Frank said on Nights, which she completely blew out of proportion. Facebook Story, the interlude right after Pretty Sweet, takes this idea and applies it to a different situation from a French producer that didn't follow his girlfriend on Facebook and she blew it out of proportion. We can imply that this interlude relates to Frank's relationship with Allara because of the events on Nights. The relationship turns violent and life-threatening, ending terribly. Because of this, Frank ends up spiraling. Close to You takes a break from the Allara and Frank storyline and goes back to Self-Control, where Frank explains that the relationship ended mutually and ended with peace. However, Frank clings to old memories in a desperate attempt to stay with her and, in his mind, still mean something. Clinging on to old memories is Frank's way of finding meaning. The next 3 songs on the album are the reason why Blonde is widely considered to be one of the greatest albums of all time. The complex storytelling reflects the common 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The emotional 3 songs reflect the heartbreak that Frank experiences, with White Ferrari starting it. White Ferrari starts with Frank reflecting on old memories. He's thinking back to him on a drive with Allara where they were just driving. No talking, no music, just together. Frank clings on to these memories as strongly as he can, twisting his reality as if the relationship never ended and always stayed as pleasant as that car ride. Through that, he expresses his anger by listing off all the bad things about Allara, such as saying that she was too basic. However, he continues to deny the end of the relationship. In his mind, it never ended, he was just venting. Then we get possibly the saddest, most devastating part of the album. Frank pictures a reality where the two never broke up. He comes to the realization that they broke up, but desperately starts bargaining to figure out what he could have done differently to keep her, and what he could still do to salvage their relationship. In his mind, this is the best version of himself, and the happiest version of himself. She would also be the happiest version of herself, but Frank believes that she's blocking that vision out. In Siegfried, the next song, Frank's separating himself from reality and leads to a deep depression, sinking to pretty much the lowest point you could go. He is spiraling out of his mind, reducing himself to versions of self-hate, no longer blaming Alluring or talking down about Alluring, but rather talking down about himself, repeatedly telling himself that he's not brave, and telling himself that he's living a life that needs to be changed. He needs to let his dreams of being wanted and being in a fulfilled relationship go, for it has gone too far. He's been living a life where he chases a fantasy dream. He just needs to grow up. These are ideas that are placed in his mind that lead him to a conclusion. It's just a fond farewell to a friend. This relationship that he fought so hard to preserve, so hard to manage, has sucked all the life out of him. In the relationship, Frank found what he was searching for. Nirvana was found in the happiness of his relationship. It was that ride at night. He spent so much time and effort desperately trying to reach Nirvana, only to come to the conclusion that he lost it along with losing Alluring. For Frank, life is a cycle. His life is separated into day and night, day being the happiness, the love, the freedom of relationships, night being the heartbreak, the agony, and the loss of that happiness. And in Frank's mind, the cycle needs to be broken. Godspeed serves as the conclusion to the story between Frank and Alluring, and it serves as the last stage of grief and an answer to the cycle that he created in his mind. Godspeed serves as a message that Frank wrote to Alluring, which completely accepts the outcome of the relationship. He tells her that she will not lead an easy life. There will be challenges that she can't overcome, moments that she wishes that she could give up. But Frank tells her that he will always be there for her. He will always be able to help her, but he has to let go of his claim on her. He's no longer dating her, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't care for her. As Blonde concludes, many themes are presented to finish the story. Identity, fulfillment, priorities, immortality, heartbreak. These are all things that teenagers tend to think about. What makes Blonde so special is that even though the stories are personal to Frank, they can be found relatable by so many people. If you get to the core of what Frank is discussing, everyone is able to see themselves in these stories. Whether that be through something abstract like considerations about afterlife or immortality to the simple concept of hanging on to an ex-partner, Frank hits on so many levels. There are two more crucial themes to discuss, one of them being identity. If you think about the album as a whole, the story follows Frank finding himself and discovering who he is. He battles with what he feels his priorities are in life, what he needs to do, and who he needs to be. Even the title versus the cover of the album is evident in this. The title of Blonde is spelled with an E, but the cover spells it without one. The struggle between this identity as a member of the LGBTQ community reflects his struggles with being himself, as he is so often told to be on the album. What comes from this search for identity is a sense of growth, which I believe to be the most important theme on the album. Futura Free is the 17th and final song on Blonde, and it acts as something of an epilogue. It's, in simple terms, Frank's reflection on his experiences from the album and what he's learned. Rather than being a story about himself or another person, it's an acknowledgement of what happened in the previous stories. He mentions that he's impressed by how much he's grown, but acknowledges that he still has much more growth to accomplish. He also makes a very important point that even though the time of his life at which these stories took place were chaotic and out of his control, he still views them as some of the greatest years of his life. Once again, Frank expresses the benefit of hindsight as if this were the end of Godspeed, he might not feel this way. However, he is able to express his growth in such a beautiful and poetic manner. In many ways, Blonde is not at all about pursuing a relationship or finding love. That's just the secondary meaning of this album. Truthfully, Blonde is a series of stories that lead to Frank finding true self-meaning, growing to become more emotionally mature as a person. We get the benefit of hearing different stories that Frank shares to express this point besides the main timeline between him and Alluring. As this album goes on, he learns to be more expressive. He learns to focus on himself and his priorities rather than trying to appeal to others. He learns to let go of his claim on his former partners and end a relationship without hurting them or himself. And he's able to do all of this while maintaining a sonically beautiful album. The whole album follows him searching for heaven on earth, from Frank's visual of his stairway to heaven in his living room to his search for nirvana through drugs. He finds the realization that someone can experience nirvana but not know it until they are well out of it. This is a realization that comes through trauma and hard-learned truth, but is also a sign of human growth, of emotions, and understanding of complex feelings. Blonde is one of the most important and impressive albums of our time, and it's evident that Frank Ocean was able to move many people and relate to many people on this album. Thank you for listening. I'm Jakob Kuhn, and from American Public Radio, this is Alluring Albums.